Greetings, my friends, and welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents. Just got off the phone with a new acquaintance of mine, Chris Crutchfield. He's a video producer in Los Angeles, California, and we just decided to get together and talk. And I liked the talk, so I asked him if I couldn't record some of it and play it for you. Chris is a rather atypical explorer of the authentic way. You'll be able to tell in the conversation just how much time he's put on, just how much time he's put in on finding the truth, and I think he's come a long way. On another note, I have to say how much I enjoy the Zoom meeting client. At this point at the Yahad, we do all our meetings on Zoom and record everything with both audio and video. I mean, it's not so exciting or anything, but with Zoom, the clarity is so good, and we've used so many other meeting clients that were horrible, but this is the best, voted best in 2018. Why don't you download Zoom? You can find it at Zoom, ZOOM.us. That'll allow us to link up. We can have conversations like this all the time, and they can be preserved for the future. You never know. One of these days, you might have a biographer who's going to be looking for obscure stuff like this. So get Zoom, let's talk. And speaking of talk, here's Chris and I, and it's nothing but talk. Thank you for listening.
Based off of moments in your show archives that have been like, ooh, I wonder this. And, you know, a lot of my wonders I can research, but sometimes it's like, I just need to ask. I really don't know. I remember in the episode with Andrew Carlson, was he the individual who you mentioned had reworked part of the temple scroll?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did I send you that?
Not yet. Okay. Not yet. But I was going to remind about that. But in that particular episode, he mentions in the Lord's Prayer, the on earth as it is in heaven line being not necessarily part of the original text in the King James Version, not in the NIV. And so there's a little bit of a discrepancy for whether it was even there or not to begin with, in addition to a lot of other things like our Father who is in heaven as opposed to the Father who's not, these simple questions that kind of give you clues to the fact that there might have been some embellishment with the scribal accounts of those stories.
Yeah.
But that line stuck out to me in particular, the on earth as it is in heaven, because as I began learning about some of the modern day Bible, and I use that in very strong air quotes, translations like the Message Bible and some of these other newfangled Bible translations, when it came to my attention that there's a very prolific satanic quote in the Message Bible based around specifically that line, that went off in my mind as like a bloop, 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 bloop. Remember to kind of like try to get some clarity on the source of that line, because if you read in the Message Bible, you familiar with this Bible translation?
Yeah, Eugene Peterson.
Okay. It'll talk about, I'm not familiar with his affiliations or background.
Oh, I got one in here. It's a paraphrase. I wouldn't. Yeah.
But a lot of people, it was presented to me as a Bible. And there's another pastor named Sean Bowles, who I have dealt with on a couple of occasions here in Los Angeles, who stand out. He's one of the bigger pastors in LA, Sean Bowles, and he'll straight up tell people, this Message Bible, you really got to get your hands on. This is like a good Bible. And it's not presented as a paraphrase. It's presented as an actual canon of
If you
Bible.
consider it as a critical piece of critical manuscript, it is not a good Bible in any respect.
I would agree.
It's a complete mutilation. But
of everything.
Of course, there's a perspective here that they're pursuing, and that is to appeal to the idea that Jesus was here to make peace, to start the Christian church. He's present in the Christian church today, teaching and healing and loving people no matter what they do, or no matter how they treat each other, or whether they respect Yahweh or not. It's kind of like this great God that the Masons worship in their meetings. I mean, some like a giant grandfather or something.
I call him
to make some money. That's another part of it. Let's make some money.
I call it Christian Crowleyism, the do without will, the Christian version. Do whatever you want to, grace and stuff. You can do whatever. But if you look in Matthew, in the Lord's Prayer, in that particular translation, it'll say, something instead of give us this day our daily bread, it's like give us 3 square meals and da 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 da. And then it goes as above, so below, as a paraphrase of on earth as it is in heaven.
Actually, the term in there should be on the land as in the skies.
As
Plural.
in Shamaim, because it's plural. Oh, yeah.
We're not talking about the whole earth.
Right.
We're just talking about the land.
The land.
And we're talking about heaven. That word should not be any place, because there's nothing in there that relates to the idea of heaven that people have today.
Correct. And, and it's concepts like that just speak to the structural manipulation that English is culpable of in this whole thing. Like, so there's a part of it is a scribal issue, but even before translations and words being rendered properly, part of it is English, I believe. The fact that the English language, A, doesn't have certain words that really represent Hebrew or Greek words, or B, have other words whose connotation has, I have a bird, by the way. Say hello, Chan. She's a wild sparrow that we rescued. Hey, little
sparrow.
Yeah, come here. She's kind of like...
She's tame.
She is. We rescued her when she was like a day or two old, so she's been a house bird ever since.
That's great.
But she just flutters around. And
I love yeah, I've had them before too.
They're great.
So much fun.
That on earth, the as above, so below is a relatively famous Hermetic axiom in Hermetic Luciferianism.
And Gnosticism.
And Gnosticism, precisely. That kind of as a coined phrase it's already picked its side, so to speak. And then comes a Bible that essentially uses it as a replacement of an already misrepresented term on earth as it is in heaven. And you have like a 1-2 flip cup jump, so to speak, from what the author said or what the master actually probably intended for that prayer to be, and an entirely different thing, a short time later.
Well, that's an idiomatic translation too. I mean, he's not trying to be literal about it at all. He's trying to convey a certain notion that everybody already can grasp.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole notion of heaven, hell, the sky. They're completely different now than they were at that time. Of course, the words are different. However, English language can convey most of it. It's just the interpreters want to stay traditional on this because, again, one of the main reasons that these pundits come out with these Bible translations is that they've got an axe to grind with the denomination and they want to make some money.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to make any money with the Snyder Bible, for instance. Right. You're not going to make any money because we're going to get just the bold truth in the interpretation there rather than something that's sugar-coated and something you're already used to. Because those kind of passages at the time were amazing. They were astonishing. They were shocking. If that was brought out in English today, they would be very dismaying to people. Scandalizing, of course.
Mm-hmm, totally.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
It's okay. No worries.
Look at that bird.
Oh, yeah. She loves... we just found her outside. She was in a flower pot with 2 deceased siblings on a hot Los Angeles 100-degree day, and we picked her up and said, "Oh, come inside."
How'd you get her to eat and everything?
Well, because she was so young, we went to it's a store called Birds Plus right down the road, and they have all kinds of exotic birds and all cages and foods, and the guy at the store was like, "Feed her this baby hand food formula every 30 minutes. Hopefully she'll make it through the night." She made it through the night. We kept feeding her for the next couple weeks, and then eventually her feathers grew out, and we kind of weaned her off the baby food, and she would just kind of hop up on the table and eat what we were eating. So she would nibble on cereal or bread or fruit or grapes. She loves spinach. That's like her favorite food. And we'll give her occasionally a little Q-tip, and it's equivalent of giving a dog a bone. She'll take a Q-tip and just like play with it and wrestle it around.
You know something? You're not only a father, but it appears that you're a mother as well.
I can accept that.
Mother.
Yeah, this little birdie, she loves my beard. She kind of like snuggles in the bottom of my beard. We joke, me and my wife, because my wife is usually, I'm such a night owl that I'll stay up often pretty late, and she'll be up a little earlier. She's always like, "Oh, I don't want the bird to have to be by herself too much. So she'll always take the bird out in the morning or be the first to really feed her or talk with her. But the second the sun goes down, it's like she's a daddy's bird.
Mm-hmm.
She loves hanging out with me as soon as it's evening time. And she's almost like, no, I've had my time with you, Jen. I'm over you now. So it's cool. She's great. Her name's Chamberlain Latuita.
Ah, good.
And we just kind of let her do her thing. We end up having to play like poop cleanup a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately, the poops don't really stick or stink. So it's really easy. Just a little piece of paper towel and water.
Sure.
Good. But
how fortunate you are.
Thank you. I wonder, it's Andrew Carlson's opinion that that line wasn't in the text. Do you feel like that?
I think what was in there, or what should be in there, is land and skies.
Okay.
I can't say, I have never seen any place where the exegetes have said that those are additions. However, there are other parts of it that are certainly additions. I think that he was talking about that in that little series he did on scribal additions or margin additions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think Andrew is a very unique individual. I think he's 26 now. I met him when he was about 19 over the internet, and we kind of rescued each other. You know, we were like competitors for a while. We're really good friends now. He's got quite a history, which I won't go into now, but he does have a tendency to make his own decisions about things like that. Mm-hmm. He's one of the few that really has acquired the expertise to do that. He focuses in on that constantly and has since he was a child. So whenever he has opinions like that, I listen to them. Most people just say, it's him, it's Onia.
Right.
Call him Oni. It's Oni. It's, Oni, that kind of thing. But yeah. I listen, especially after that temple scroll thing he did. That blew my mind, proving that the temple scroll is the original Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why nobody pays attention to his proof. I mean, even a caveman could see it.
Right.
Yeah, but that's him. And he's very, I don't know if you talked to him before, but he's very easy to talk to. And maybe you'll want to talk to him about that and see why he is of that opinion. I know the end of that prayer is an interpolation, glory, that glory part.
For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever.
But obviously we don't have the source of that prayer.
Right.
So one day that'll pop out of the ground. And
that's the prayer. That's because the original Matthew is kind of long forgotten.
Yes.
Or long lost or whatever.
I think there are pieces in there, and he and I talked about this too at one time, that in fact I think we did on that recording, that I'm pretty sure that the Matthew, or at least from the source of Matthew, comes a good bit of chapters 5 through 7. Obviously that doesn't belong in that narrative. It's come from another source and an earlier source, and of course he's going to have a different opinion, but why don't you ask him about that? He's easy to talk to. I can hook you up.
I will. I might do that. That's fascinating. Mostly the reason it went off on my radar was because of the difference, I guess, or the discrepancy with what seems to be like a trending Bible version, the Message Bible, that decidedly, he puts in a pre-existing Luciferian quote in that.
Oh, definitely. Now, where's your source of a Luciferian quote?
I have to dig through it. I have some of it saved, but every time I saw those words, as above, so below, it always was tied with different.
The Gospel of Thomas, for instance. There are several sayings in there. And some of the other Egyptian Gospels from Nag Hammadi that are very close to that same kind of saying. The two shall be one, what's above will be below, et cetera, et cetera. And that's picked up by the Masons.
Totally. I believe that the premise, the concept, or the theme of what that's saying is kind of more universally applicable, not specifically Luciferian. I'm just saying, as above, so below, those four English words being having seen that line come up many times in my research, always tied to Hermeticism.
Yeah. I'm going to break in at this point to define hermetic for you, if you've not heard of that term. It comes from the god Hermes, messenger of God, and is defined as relating to an ancient occult tradition encompassing alchemy, astrology, and theosophy. Over and out. Egyptian gospels are, without doubt, hermetic. In fact, they're obviously and proclaimed as hermetic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, no. I agree with you completely there.
I look at it all like I have this way of it's almost like certain people do math. I don't know if I'm Asperger's or not, or have Asperger's or anything like it. I love to work backwards in getting to the root of an issue as opposed to working forward, because I find that the reality of the present kind of gives you a little bit more of a material to chew on, if you will, and the intentions of the past, whether those intentions were even if the writing of those intentions happens to seem one way, but the manifestation seems a different way. The Paul thing is probably a really good example of that, because I've always, I haven't always thought this way, but there's another friend of mine who's very much into the Torah belief, but he's like a huge proponent for Paul. Now, we don't really get in arguments about the Paul thing, but his view of how he parses everything related to Paul out is based squarely on the writings that we have of Paul and what is said. And I've always told him, I was like, well, I see what you're saying. I don't hate Paul. I don't probably trend as far as does in terms of how I feel about Paul specifically, but I was like, you can look at what the church is in the existence of today, and you can see that whether this was Paul's intention or not, his writings have been used as the primary source for the reason, or I should say the justification for the abrogation of the law. And even if that wasn't his intention, to me, it says something about the way that the chips fell, that nobody else's text ended up like that. Not Peter's, not James's, not Yeshua's words. Nobody else's words in any canonized or extra biblical text can really be used in a ironclad way to suggest that the law is dead and done away with, or the law is as a trainer, and now that the master's come, you don't need the trainer anymore. Chief of which are Yeshua's words. And again, that's not a reason to necessarily write someone's entire.
The way I see it, you got to go one way or the other. I mean, if you go Paul, then you have to admit that Paul is the founder of your faith, and you've got to take Colossians and Ephesians with the rest of them and decide that they are authentic, or you've got to go the other way. I just happened to look this up in, of all places, Wikipedia. I put it in a chat so I would have it later on when I dig this out again, so I wouldn't forget it. But yes, it says that it is connected with sacred geometry, that goes back way before New Testament times, Hermeticism, and of all things, the tarot,
right? The
Emerald Tablet, Hermes Trismegistus, Pseudo-Apollonius, Polydorus.
Yeah, that's a part of the history of the world that I'm still probably the weakest on, is learning about what went on between, let's say, Noah and David, like just that section of the world.
Nobody knows anything.
And do you think that that's because of a concerted effort to diminish that information, or say what?
Of course. And in looking at the Egyptian histories and the biblical histories this last couple of months on Wednesday night, we are coming up with some incredible correspondences between some of these personages and dates that they can't be overlooked. We've come to the conclusion that Essenism, for instance, is out of Egypt. It's out of Ottonism to a great extent, and there are so many connections between the Nazarene faith as portrayed in the Dead Sea Scrolls and Ottonism, and even the Old Testament and Ottonism, that if they weren't connected, that would be the miracle.
That would be interesting. So what general time frame do you purport that Pharaoh Akhenaten or Ottonism kind of existed?
Well, let's see. I would say it's the 12th dynasty.
Okay.
And Akhenaten ruled in 1350 BC.
Okay.
You see, this is right between what Bible scholars say are Jacob and Moses.
Okay. So in that gray area that even the canon doesn't have too much to say about.
Yeah, but it's not gray anymore. You know, Moses himself, if you've looked at Jasher, Moses was the king of Cush for 30 years.
Yeah.
Fits right in. Now, we can identify now Joseph in Egypt with a personage, Uyah, or Yuya,
yeah.
and several other people that are right in there at the time, as well as the specific correspondence between Ottonism and Hebrew religion, and the Hebrews that were involved in that particular time period. For instance, Akhenaten, who originated probably his earlier family, but he originated this monotheism. He moves with 50,000 people out of the blue from Memphis or Karnak down to this place in the desert called Akhetaten. Now, where did he get these 50,000 monotheists? There weren't any in Egypt. He had to get them someplace. He certainly didn't, as just in the royal family, as making that many converts. Well, it's obvious then that Moses didn't have all the Hebrew. They were dispersed all down through the Nile Valley, and there's even a indication that there was a priesthood in what's Sudan today, that priesthood that has the exact same characteristics as the priesthood that James the Just was in. Exactly the same. Which unfortunately, when they put in the Aswan Dam, they covered that area, and now we can't research it anymore. But see, why I'm enthusiastic about this at all is, number one, I got an open mind. It's not going to change my faith one bit. Not going to change my faith. And second of all, this is something that we have been studying for probably 2 years, and we're coming down to the crux now of making some hypotheses ourselves on this and giving the evidence for that in order to broadcast this. It's going to be another reason why people are going to say you're nuts and you're a heretic and stay away from him.
Right.
But it's going to be as close to the truth as you can get in these days.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me, because one of the questions that I had written down was how to parse out Egyptian history as it relates to the Hebrew people compared to the whole Osiris, Isis, Ra, that type of Egyptian. Here in LA, Black people love talking about Egypt, but it's always with relation to Isis, Osiris, Ra, the Egyptian counterpart. Basically I asked it just like I wrote it down. So I do recall, in a nutshell, as the story, as I read, paraphrasing, at some point the old kingdom, whatever, existed to where Joseph was sold into captivity in Egypt, interprets the dream for Pharaoh, gets given the position second in command, ends up establishing a rapport with the Pharaoh at the time, who basically believes and attributes his faith, or at least converts, for lack of a better way to put it.
Chris, you mentioned Andrew Carlson earlier in the program. And as a matter of fact, we have him right here. He just passed through all the way to his dressing room. Let's just stop him and see what he has to say about these things. Andrew Carlson, come on over here. What do you have to say right now? What comes to your head? I'm sure you're thinking about Bible exegesis, interpolation, scribal marginal notes, and correct translations. You have a genius for that, so I'm sure you're thinking about that right now. Tell us what you're thinking about.
What I've determined is that there are three primary bases for determining the corruptions of Scripture and how to reconstruct what the original may have said. The second way is,
if I drank coffee, I would be drinking Sting coffee, the coffee that bites back.
Yes!
The Sting coffee, the coffee that bites you back.
just passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue, where many friends and loved ones have gone on before, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore.
Welcome back. You're listening to Jackson Snyder Presents, brought to you by the Vero Essin Yaha and Hebrew Nation Radio.
Just beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore.
Well, my friends, let me remind you, we are talking with Chris Crutchfield in Los Angeles, California. He is a video producer and a friend of this ministry, an inquisitive fellow who is seeking, truly seeking, and he will undoubtedly find what he's looking for because he's living out his calling right now. Let's get back to Chris.
Joseph was sold into captivity in Egypt, interprets the dream for Pharaoh, gets given the position, second in command, ends up establishing a rapport with the Pharaoh at the time, who basically believes and attributes his faith, or at least converts, for lack of a better way to put it, to the faith of the almost second to youngest son of Jacob, whose name is Israel. And that people existed in Goshen and in a portion of Egypt, Egypt, for a large period of time. And then at some point they, for the most part, migrated away via Moses. But then where my mind goes into question mark mode is how much of that influence remained, and where did this whole like raw sun worship get applied to Egypt and kind of become the mascot of Egyptology of today, if you will.
I think that you're not the only one in that sense, and that's specifically what we're trying to find. And we made inroads in this, in that we have found plenty of evidence that before the monotheism of Egypt came out of the closet, and this particular Pharaoh took these 50,000 people before Moses, or maybe he was Moses, exodus them down to Akhenaten, that this religion was the secret religion of pharaohs at least back 100 years and probably more. We even find Yahweh, that name, in their pantheon in such a way. And when we think about Joseph being Yuya and the viceroy for Amenhotep III, that is Akhenaten's father, and having a prominent place, and finding his corpse, his preserved corpse, that you've got to think that this Joseph had something to do with this, that perhaps he was even the founder and originator of Otanism in Egypt that came down to Pharaoh, whom he served. So, the evidence is sketchy, but some fellows have put this together in such a way as to render a lot of evidence and make it very clear. And there's a couple of authors that will explain to you that dark period right there. And you will think, well, this has got to be it, despite what these old Egyptologists say, because there are too many similarities between people, between things and acts that happen, and the movement of the Hebrews. And I believe that there were plenty of Hebrews down here in southern Egypt that knew nothing about Moses, that didn't go over to Canaan from Goshen. Question is, where was Moses for that other 70 years or 60 years? Where was he? And Egyptology, not classical Egyptology, but what's coming out today from autodidactic scholars and scholars that teach themselves, is that Moses had a history that's not accounted for in the scripture, and probably for good reason, because though Egypt plays a prominent part in the scripture, especially in the prophets, it would not have been popular to say that Moses was the king of Cush, like Jasher says, or that Moses was Pharaoh Akhenaten himself. himself, which is a great possibility, or that the days of Moses and Joseph wasn't 300 years or 250 years.
It was longer or shorter?
Shorter.
Okay.
We're figuring out chronology by the Bible's reckoning. And a lot of the Bible's reckoning is symbolic, in fact. And, you got these people like Methuselah lives 900 years. What's the use of living if you can't get no women in 9,000 years, 1,000 years? So if that is taken as being symbolic, that changes everything.
Yeah.
It's impossible to do a Bible chronology.
Okay, that's a good question, or that's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's been one of the challenges that I've been kind of hoping to try to settle on, is what happened in what order. We can all agree Genesis 1 was probably the first, but then we know Genesis speaks of two creations. We know that something happened with the Great Deluge that obfuscated a number of things. The rational thinker would be like, well, if everything is wiped away in the flood, how do we even know about that? Jasher and Jubilee's address at least purport that angels, messengers came and basically told the story to scribes post-flood. And that's how you get a lot of those texts. But I guess from your understanding, I know it's really tough to really know how to put things in what order. And there's been a tremendous amount of like insertions and deletions, and everybody lost a period of information from this point to this point. But from, I remember hearing somebody talk about the book of Job being one of the earliest.
Yeah, it's the earliest. Yeah.
And the book.
That's what I was going to say. Bible chronology, as far as the order of the books, that's artificial. There, at least insofar as we can tell. And again, Andrew Carlson comes up with this theory that Genesis itself was based on an earlier text found in the scrolls called the Book of Lamech, or the Genesis Apocryphon. It makes a good case for that too, as well as the new moon thing, because the Bible talks about new moons being in there as part of the creation, but the Bible never mentions moon. It's talking about something new, but what? That's been replaced by the priest. And I suppose that you're familiar with the Wellhausen theory, or the documentary hypothesis.
Yes.
Very important here to see what's his name? Friedman has got a new version of the Bible, which I have, that takes the priestly and the Elohim source out of there and leaves another version like that where it's color coded. So you can take it out yourself. So you've got consistent witnesses for these things. And if it is a priestly source, for instance, or a Deuteronomist source, then that's going to have come much later.
Right.
And it's going to be skewed like crazy, depending on what these power freaks wanted done.
At the time, yeah.
And that's the extraordinary thing, again, about this temple scroll, because being the original Deuteronomy.
Right. Is the temple scroll one of the Dead Sea Scrolls that's more intact, like pretty complete?
It's the longest one.
Okay.
But also there are a number of lacunae in there that Andrew keeps the lacunae in. He doesn't try to fill those in except where he can find places in Deuteronomy that will fit there.
Okay.
But yes, it's fairly well complete, but there are some parts of the law there that are missing that we would like to see. Like, for instance, when it comes to plural marriage, it says something like, as to plural marriage, and then ... Something's missing there.
Oh, got it.
It really is. Okay, yeah.
We're like, can we find those texts anywhere?
Yeah, well, they're going to pop up one of these days.
Yeah. Do you find that I've heard people explain that the very existence of the Dead Sea Scrolls coming out of the earth is part of a fulfillment of prophecy from way back in even Enoch's time about...
That's my whole premise. Enoch 103.
Got it.
These books, I can't remember exactly how to quote the text, but when I read the text in Enoch 103, it was exciting to me, and it really got me on the idea of this cosmic covenant, and that these books were coming out as they were supposed to come out by the original plan.
Fascinating. It really is.
Yes, it is. Maybe we ought to get together periodically and work through some of these things with some of the people.
I I would like that. I really would. I find that, at least people I talk to, they want to know the truth because, again, you come from a Christian upbringing and you're taught the Bible is the infallible word of God. There is nothing outside of the 66 books that's even worth looking into. Case closed, right? Mm-hmm. Then you get information on what the Council of Trent or the Council of Nicaea or any other councils, Constantinople or any of the other ones actually were. And you're like, but hold on, this dude, things aren't adding up. And as you rabbit trail and rabbit hole more, which obviously you've been doing for decades now, you find a very different conclusion in terms of, the canon as opposed to these extra biblical books. But I think people are hungry for the truth, and I know I am, and my wife is, and some of the people that we talk to. And I guess the hardest thing for us to know is where to look for this stuff. I'm 35, she's 38, and we're very detailed when it comes to certain things, but not other things. I'll read ancient texts. I just haven't developed the ability to really get a voice from the writer as well as you have.
Look. This is since childhood. This is what I've been doing, and I've been through 10 years of college on this, and
Greek.
Yeah, Greek, and I've translated this stuff, and I've lived for this because this has been my mission in life, all stages of my life. And what might help you might think about is hosting a forum on topics you're interested in.
Okay.
With a panel being some people that have been working at this, I could be on there, Andrew could be on there, a few more people, like Brad could be on there for that matter. Mm-hmm. And you could do that periodically, even once a week or so, and we could publicize that because you wanting to know these things and you know enough to know what you're talking about, and you're openly seeking this stuff, your mind isn't made up on anything, you'd be a perfect host. With your voice, your presence, I want you to think about that because we've got outlets, I should say we've got, what's the word?
Avenues or so.
Avenues, yeah. We've got avenues to get this word out. We've got a good niche market. We've got, 3,000 people that have tried to get some information out of us, etc. And those people are going to get onto this, and you'll be fulfilling a very important part in ministry. I'm just throwing that out to you.
That's good. I'm glad you did because you wouldn't be the first.
I don't know what your time is like, or
it's sporadic. It's like sometimes I've got plenty of times, other times I have no time. It's all over the map at this point, especially with the baby. But many people, I've been made aware through other people's testimony, if you will, that I've been given the gift of teaching and of explaining, using my words to synthesize thoughts and abstract concepts to parse them down simple enough for people who aren't really as ethereal minded or technical minded to be able to understand. And I can recognize that and agree with that. But ever since I started learning this, I probably had 30 people tell me, you need to hop on YouTube. You need to start a YouTube channel.
Oh, definitely.
And my answer has always been, maybe one day. I'm not saying I won't, but I feel a heavy mantle or a large responsibility with making sure that I be leading people in the right direction.
Of course.
I've just seen so many YouTubers learn something for 3 weeks and then hop on and start a channel about things that they...
Oh, yeah, bullshitters.
Right, bullshitters, exactly. People who are still trying to figure out what they think they know and what? And it ends up... And they sometimes garner thousands of followers, but I'm like, none of these people are...
Oh, yeah.
Because...
it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Gosh.
She didn't want to be one of those people. So I always said, well, I'm not saying no, but when I feel like the Father is really kicking me in the butt to do it, I'll do it.
I think you're being kicked in the butt right now. Here's the opportunity. And look, this is something you don't have to do regularly. You can do it periodically. And you don't have to give the answers. What you have to do is to sum up at the end what you think is truth or not. You know what editing's like. You do that for a living.
Totally. Yeah.
These things can be edited any way, and it can be put into a production form very quickly.
Yeah.
And yes, I think it would catch on fast. That's one thing that we at the Ahad just don't have. We don't have the hosting type personality that you have and the presence you have. You're good. But you've got to follow your calling.
Yeah.
You better take this serious, man.
I think I will. This conversation is giving me a lot of I guess, reassurance that, when we first started out on this, I really, for a long time, because I don't go to a building in LA that talks about this stuff and I don't have a Ahad here, I'm like, I don't think I'm going crazy, but I feel like I'm the only one out here that's doing this. And then we find resources online of other people who are already on this journey. And so I have different moments where I go, oh, wow, okay, we're not the only people who ask these questions. And, you know, I've always been, the big challenge for me has been, because I come from like a high production value background, I know how much time that takes, and I know how my week, because I don't work a regular job, my office is right where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
And some weeks I'll have more than enough time, and other weeks I'll have no time. And
it doesn't have to take much time.
You're right.
You don't have to have a perfect product, especially if you got a lot to do like I do. You know, you throw them up the best you can, but those people are going to be drawn by the spirit through the noise, through the sea of waves, to that, the ones that are supposed to be there. And then you're going to find people like books popping up. They're just going to pop up in different places, like you pop up in my life here. It's a wonderful thing.
And I always go back. I have this thing I call the original friend. It's like a concept of trying to figure out who you met to introduce you to who, to how you meet, you know, an individual. And I'm thinking, obviously, I found out your work through Brad. I don't even remember how I found out his work. I think I just saw a video on YouTube as a related thing and was like, that looks interesting, I'll watch it later. And I didn't watch it for 9 entire months. And then I watched it, and then I found his channel, and then I heard you. But I couldn't even go one back from Brad, because I've never met Brad. I've spoken to him once on Facebook, but I've never really had like a FaceTime or anything with him. And we've shared his work and your work and a lot of other people's work with different friends and different people personally. But I've always been like, at a certain point, I know that the Ruach is working and stirring in me to speak and to share. And my wife is always on me to like, you shouldn't be afraid to share what you know. And I'm always like, you're right. I just don't like hopping on Facebook and getting into Facebook rants with people about what I know.
Of course.
That's like pearls before swine as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But
sure.
I do know now that I'm at a point where I want to be useful. I feel like I'm getting to the point where I feel like I don't want to be like what was the parable of the talents? And I find it ironic that the King James or whatever translates that word as talents when it was monetary thing. But if you look at any of the homonyms for the word talent, gifts that you've been given, just interpersonally, if you will. And what I don't want to be is the guy who buried his talent in the ground just to make sure that it wasn't stolen or nothing bad happened to it, you know. And so I kind of, that's part of what prompted me reaching out to you. Like, okay, I've been listening to Jackson's stuff for several months now. I really like his ability to stay open-minded to a thing and to really ask questions and entertain other people's questions and offer enough, counter questions, if you will, to the whole conversation to be able to, for people to get something out of it and not sound like a sermon, because I really believe that this is what these yahads and assemblies were. They weren't like a guy telling other people.
That's right.
What to think.
The Essene way. That is the Essene way, and the Essene way is the Nazarene way. They're exactly the same, but we're looking for unity and diversity, not diversity and conflict.
Correct.
That's
and not unity just for the sake of unity, because I don't believe that's what Yeshua was about either.
If you want to believe that women have to wear a birdhouse on her head to pray, that's your business. So you make it a salvation issue, then you make it my business. So some of these things are not worth talking about. You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.
Even I go through cycles of where I feel more on it and less on it with this type of research, just because I don't feel like I've ever got overwhelmed or burnt out, but I just get to a point where I'm like, Father, I need to feel like I have my hand on the driver's seat, not your driver, not the ultimate driver's seat, but just I got my rudder, in one direction for a few days or weeks, and then I'll like come out of it, go back into it, come out of it, go back into it. It's funny you say that, because I've often said that to my wife, specific about the Paul thing, because she tends to she's not I always say, she doesn't go as far as Brad does, but she's more on the Brad side of the Paul issue than the central side. And I'm always like, if someone's doing the Torah and they're following Yahweh to the best of their ability by doing what he asked, it doesn't really matter if they know about Paul discrepancies or not, because Paul isn't a salvation issue. How you view Paul isn't salvation issue.
Exactly. Exactly.
If you can figure out how to interpret what he says to bolster why you should be doing the Torah, then great. More power to you and him.
It's like the Didache says, that you do to the best of your ability. You do the best you can. We're all limited in some respect.
Right.
But I think one important thing that helps with those limitations is to find your calling, find your ministerial niche.
Sure. Yeah.
And of course, I think that would help you.
Yeah, that's what I can certainly say. I'm kind of like,
and your wife too.
Top settling. Hers, I feel like her voice and her song, her poetry and her singing voice.
No need to worry. He's on my side. His word will guide me. Angel of light. Father, save me from violence, hatred and fear. Keep me above the water. Show me the way. Yahweh, your mighty name can move every mountain if you decide. Yahweh, your power reigns. You made what is good and I'm thankful, Father. Yahweh, your mighty name. No need to worry. He's on my side. His word will guide me. Angel of light. Father, open my eyes. Establish your way. Give me understanding so I can see. Yahweh, your mighty name can move every mountain if you decide.
Wow. That was the wife, Jennifer Crutchfield. What a voice. That's going to be the voice on our new audiobook, the reading of the Odes of Salome, the sister of Yeshua. We've got to start that project right now. Again, wow. You've been listening to a discussion with Chris Crutchfield in Los Angeles, bragging on his wife's voice, and so we listened to Jennifer, and we're certain he has something to brag about, and so does the father.